Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a complex stack of sources, articles, research, theological texts, and really extract the conceptual architecture you need to be well-informed.
And today we are undertaking a really crucial deep dive.
It feels like a very important one. We're looking into the very specific, and I have to say, surprisingly dense framework surrounding mockery and ridicule in Islamic thought.
It is dense. And our mission today is complex. We're trying to move far beyond just the simple idea of, don't be mean.
Right.
We're actually dissecting a legal and linguistic framework, one that precisely categorizes different acts of social aggression.
So we're looking for the boundaries, the lines that distinguish, say, lighthearted play from subtle sarcasm or overt belittlement, all the way up to actions that can become major sins or even disbelief.
Exactly. The sources teach us that this isn't a flat plane. It's more like a topographical map with different elevations of severity.
I like that analogy, a topographical map. Okay, so let's unpack this conceptual map, starting with the foundation. The sources seem to identify two main pillars of degradation.
They do. Mockery, which is sukriya, and ridicule, or istihza.
Okay, so sukriya, what's the core conceptual engine that's driving that?
Well, the linguistic root for mockery, for sukriya, is sakira, which means, to mock or make fun of. But to really grasp its conceptual weight, we have to look at a related term.
And that is?
Tokriya. Tokir means to force or compel something for a specific purpose. And this is where the really profound insight lies.
Wow, okay. So if someone engages in sukriya, in mockery, they're basically engaging in a kind of subtle act of forcing them to be the sukri, the object, made subservient to the mocker's own need for, what? Amusement. Superiority.
Both. Absolutely. The act of mockery is rooted in a power dynamic. It's the compulsion to assume a diminished status. Terminologically, it's defined as the disdainful treatment or demeaning of someone's intellect. It's looking down on them with contempt.
So it's the active expression of an internal arrogance.
It is, and that completely reframes it, doesn't it? It's not just some passing insult. It's an attempted psychological takeover.
It really is. Now let's bring in some of the classical scholarly definitions that illustrate this.
Okay, so Ibn al-Kamal, he had a really sharp perspective on this. He saw it as a clash of value systems. He defined mockery as the act of belittling something that, while it might hold high value to the person being mocked,
right, like their family or their beliefs.
Exactly, is deemed utterly worthless by the mocker. It's an aggressive imposition of the mocker's subjective standards onto the victim.
So the mocker's own arrogance actually defines the parameters of the attack.
Yes. And then Al-Ghazali, he focused more on the visible manifestation of it. He added that sukriya involves diminishing the victim's worth, pointing out flaws in a way that generates laughter.
The performative aspect.
Exactly, the performative degradation. And it often uses imitation, gestures, or exaggerated speech. It's active, it's aimed at achieving public amusement, and it reinforces the mockers, their temporary social dominance.
Got it. Okay. So mockery, sukriya, is about active, performative belittlement driven by internal contempt, and it's aiming for a forced, diminished status for the victim. Let's pivot to that second pillar then. Ridicule or istihza.
Istihza, right.
Does its conceptual function target the person or the action, or is it both?
It's a bit of both, but with a different focus. So ridicule, or istihza, comes from the verb haza, to mock or ridicule. It has a similar result diminishment, but it targets the seriousness of the subject matter.
Okay, so it's defined as?
Terminologically, it's mocking someone without justification, and often focusing on trivial matters or, and this is key, sincerely held beliefs.
So if mockery says you are defective, what is ridicule saying?
Ridicule says what you are doing is utterly meaningless, and therefore you are meaningless for doing it.
Wow.
Ibn Taymiyyah captured this conceptual mechanism perfectly. He described istihza as treating the target's words or actions or characteristics as frivolous, as not serious.
That distinction is profound, and it's highly relevant today, I think. If mockery points out a physical defect, ridicule seems to strip the victim's actions of any moral weight.
Precisely. Let's take an example. If someone mocks a woman for the way she dresses, that might be sukriya. You're pointing out a perceived flaw. But if someone mocks a believer for giving charity,
You're not mocking the money.
you're not mocking the money itself, no. You are ridiculing the sincerity of the charitable act. You're dismissing the moral intention behind it, stripping it of any spiritual value. And this attack on sincerity, on conviction, is why ridicule carries such heavy spiritual weight in the sources.
So this distinction allows the sources to differentiate between aggression aimed at personality and aggression aimed at fundamental values. Let's tie these two foundational concepts together. They have different linguistic roots, Sakira versus Haza, and different primary goals. But the sources highlight a key conceptual difference about the action requirement of the victim.
Yes, this is a subtle but really important conceptual categorization. The sources suggest that mockery, sukriya, is often unprovoked.
Unprovoked.
You simply express contempt for the person as they are without waiting for a specific current action. It's a spontaneous projection of your own arrogance.
It's just pure unbidden contempt.
Whereas ridicule, istihza, often happens as a result of an action or behavior by the person being ridiculed. The verb form itself implies a reaction. When you say, he ridiculed him, it usually implies that the victim said something or did something or expressed a belief.
That the mocker then used as the specific object you dismiss as trivial.
You've got it. So if I walk past someone and insult their lineage out of just general malice, that's unprovoked sukriya. But if I wait for them to finish a presentation on a serious topic and then I snort and make light of the gravity of their message...
That's istihza. You're minimizing the action itself.
Yes. The pathology of the insult is different. Sukriya is internal contempt made visible. Istihza is a reactive dismissal of a behavior or sincerity. And this level of conceptual specificity allows the ethical framework to address harm at every level of social interaction.
Which leads us right to the critical boundaries.
Exactly.
So if those are the core forms of degradation, we absolutely have to define the conceptual boundary between them and, well, acceptable social interaction. Where do simple joking and playfulness fit in, especially since they can often involve some light teasing?
This is where we have to anchor the discussion in the concept of intention and target. Let's look first at the boundary between ridicule and playfulness. Ridicule, as we just established, is a form of deceit and belittlement that only applies to living beings. You're degrading the person's essence or their actions.
Right. You can't spiritually or legally degrade, I don't know, a chair.
Exactly. Playfulness, on the other hand, is conceptually harmless and can be directed towards both living beings and inanimate objects. If I make a humorous exaggeration about how hard a task I'm doing is, that's just playfulness.
But if you make that same exaggeration to minimize the serious effort of a colleague,
then it drifts immediately toward ridicule. The key metric, the thing that defines acceptability, is whether the act results in the lasting degradation of a living person.
that's the metric.
Which brings us to the crucial difference between joking and mocking. And this distinction is almost entirely dependent on Naya.
The underlying intention.
The underlying intention.
Yeah.
Joking is defined as lighthearted banter without the intention to belittle. The whole point of the exchange is to share levity, not to impose a lower status on someone.
This is the ethical challenge, though, isn't it? Especially in a contemporary social setting. If a joke is objectively offensive, but the joker claims they had no intention to belittle, how does the ethical framework address that?
And this is where the definition of mockery becomes firm. Mocking always includes the intention of belittling and demeaning the other person. If the result of the banter is consistent degradation, or if the joke only works by diminishing the target.
Right.
The conceptual classification shifts, regardless of the outward claim of just joking. If the primary purpose, the niya, is to diminish, it transitions conceptually into sukriya. The intention is the conceptual dividing line between permissible humor and prohibited offense.
That places an enormous moral burden on the speaker, to police their own heart, their true motives, not just the words coming out of their mouth.
Absolutely. The sources understand that internal motives are the origin of external transgression, and they categorize these transgressions with meticulous detail, which reveals a sophisticated taxonomy for harmful speech.
So we need to dive deeper into the specific vocabulary of contempt, moving beyond just those two pillars.
We do.
Okay, let's look at the subtle arts of social corrosion, backbiting and slander. The sources use the terms hums and lambs. They appear frequently, often together, but they must conceptually refer to distinct mechanisms of attack, right?
They do. And this pair, hums and lambs, provides a fascinating insight into how scholars categorize covert versus overt aggression. It's so interesting that even the earliest interpreters struggled to pin down the exact distinction, which just reveals how complex subtle social harm really is.
So how do they try to isolate the conceptual difference?
Well, we find different frameworks. Ibn Zayd, for example, he believed hums involved nonverbal or physical gestures, a silent mockery or a critique delivered by hand movements or body language. And he defined lambs as purely verbal slander or insults delivered directly.
So physical, nonverbal scorn versus a direct verbal attack.
Exactly. But then you have Sufyan al-Thawri, who offered an alternative. He focused on the sensory perception of the mockery. He classified hums as verbal mockery, but he saw lambs as insulting through one's eyes or looks, a visual expression of contempt.
So they were desperately trying to map the attack onto the physical manifestation. Is the insult coming from the hand, the mouth, or the eye?
That's right. But the most utilized conceptual divide, the one that kind of won out, seems to revolve around visibility and directness.
Okay, so lay out that distinction for us. Covert versus overt harm using these terms.
The primary conceptual divide sees hums as subtle and covert. This is the hidden dagger. It's done behind someone's back, whispering, or through indirect means. The sources even link it to the subtle, corrosive whisperings of the devils, the hamazat ash-shayateen. It's insidious, it's corrosive, and it's non-confrontational.
And lambs.
Lambs is the open, direct mockery. It's done right in front of the person, through words or gestures that they can clearly see or hear. It's confrontational.
So, if hums is the hidden dagger, lambs is the open slap. Now, the sources suggest that hidden ridicule, hums, can sometimes be more harmful than direct insults, lambs. Why would the covert nature be conceptually more destructive?
This goes directly to the pathology of trust and community cohesion. While lambs is painful and it results in an immediate injury to your dignity, hums erodes the social fabric silently. When mockery is covert, the victim doesn't know the full extent of the harm. They don't know who the aggressors are or why they're being attacked. This creates pervasive paranoia, suspicion, and a fundamental breakdown of trust among community members. That hidden backbiting causes deeper psychological damage, and it's much harder to address legally or socially.
So the conceptual framework views the destruction of trust as a graver social injury than a direct, maybe repairable confrontation. That is a crucial insight for modern communication ethics.
It absolutely is.
Okay.
Now let's move to something highly motivated, mocking or disgrace, which is tahyir. This concept seems to move us from casual malice into strategic social destruction.
What does tahyir specifically aim to do?
Tahyir is defined as the act of attempting to disgrace someone by highlighting their faults, with the express intention of making others turn away from them.
So it's character assassination.
It is, executed through the public airing of flaws, whether they're real or just perceived.
This sounds less like spontaneous contempt and more like a deliberate, weaponized campaign. What internal state is driving this specific conceptual act?
The sources attribute tahyir to the deepest forms of negative internal states: intense animosity, crippling jealousy, or a powerful fear of rivalry. This rivalry could be over wealth, leadership, social status. Tahyir is the weapon of the competitor.
So it's a tactical deployment of shame.
To ensure the target loses their position or influence within the community. So if Sukriya is about feeling superior, Tahyir is about actively ensuring the target is socially crippled so you can move ahead. It's highly strategic.
It connects the ethical transgression directly to socioeconomic ambition and rivalry. The sources really understood power dynamics.
They certainly did.
Okay, finally, let's analyze the concept we use ubiquitously today. Sarcasm, or tekum. How does this subtle form of linguistic aggression fit into the taxonomy?
Kekum is maybe the most deceptive conceptual tool because it hides the naya almost completely. Al-Kafawi defined it as a contradictory use of words where the outward appearance seems serious, the tone is sober, maybe even polite, but the underlying intention is mocking or insulting.
So sarcasm, by this definition, is derogation disguised as sincerity.
Precisely. It requires a shared understanding of context or irony for the derogatory meaning to land.
What's the ethical problem with this method, then?
Well, the problem is threefold. First, it is intrinsically dishonest. It conceals the true intention. Second, it shifts the burden of interpretation onto the listener. And third, it allows the mocker plausible deniability. We can always say, "What? I was just being serious."
This is a powerful conceptual framework. We've covered the subtle whisper of hums, the overt dismissal of istiza, the strategic campaign of tahyir, and the deceptive linguistic attack of tekum. These distinctions really move us past subjective feelings into a realm of objective ethical categorization.
Which leads us directly to the legal consequences.
Right, the ethical and legal weight of mockery. And the foundation for this is laid explicitly in the Quran, focusing on the sanctity of human dignity.
It is. Surah Al-Hujurat provides the explicit prohibition.
It says, Let not a people ridicule another people, nor let women ridicule other women. And the reason that's given is both immediate and incredibly humbling.
The immediate justification is the ultimate cosmic check on arrogance.
Yeah.
Perhaps they may be better than them,
Right.
the mocker judges based on superficial transient qualities, but the one being mocked, the victim, they may possess an infinitely higher spiritual status in the eyes of Allah. Ibn Kathir's explanation really drives this home. You have no standing to judge their worth because their real value is hidden from you.
That one phrase immediately destroys the philosophical basis for all mockery, doesn't it? Which is always rooted in a belief in the mocker's own superiority.
And the verse goes further. It prohibits general insults and the use of offensive nicknames, tanabuz bil alkab. And the sources give us the social context for this, explaining it was revealed because the Banu Salama tribe was using derogatory nicknames, which was causing immense anger and division. The prohibition is practical, aimed at protecting community bonds.
And the legal consequence for adopting this behavior after accepting the faith is described as wretched is the name of disobedience after faith. So this places the act of social aggression directly in opposition to the moral contract of belief.
And the sources ensure that the weight of this isn't limited to this earthly life. They describe a powerful concept of divine retaliation in the hereafter. It's illustrated really clearly in Surah Al-Mutaffifin.
Walk us through that cosmic role reversal that's described there.
So the passage describes the criminals in this life who used to laugh at the believers, mock their commitment, and then go back to their own people, jesting about the oppressed.
Okay.
The ultimate consequence on the day of judgment is absolute perfect justice. The tables are fundamentally turned. The previously oppressed believers, now sitting in paradise, will become the ones watching and ridiculing the arrogant mockers in their state of ultimate humiliation.
That completely reframes mockery as a spiritual liability. Every laugh you take at someone else's expense here is like an investment in your own future, eternal humiliation.
It defines mockery as a high-stakes spiritual transaction. And if the Quran provides the foundational prohibition and the cosmic consequence, the Sunnah provides the direct, practical, and incredibly severe spiritual chain reaction.
This is the prophetic warning that links a social act directly to spiritual destruction. What is the nature of this severe chain?
The prophetic warning states, "Do not mock one another, for mocking leads to hatred, and hatred leads to disbelief." This isn't a suggestion, it's a conceptual map of spiritual decay.
So mockery is the first step.
It's the first step that hardens the heart, generating interpersonal enmity. This enmity then clouds judgment, fosters arrogance, and ultimately leads to the rejection of fundamental truths, pushing the individual toward apostasy or disbelief, kufr.
So an insult isn't just a social slight, it's a catalyst for spiritual ruin. That is a much heavier weight than we usually assign to, casual teasing.
And to make that weight palpable, the sources give us this unforgettable anecdote illustrating the gravity of words. I'm referring to the narration of Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, and Safiya.
Right, where Aisha made what seems like a single derogatory comment about Safiya's physical appearance. She just described her as short.
And the Prophet's response provided a staggering analogy of spiritual toxicity. He told Aisha that her statement, "If what you said were mixed with the water of the sea, it would have changed it."
Let's just pause and reflect on that imagery for a second. The vast, immense, pure body of the sea, a metaphor for the entire community or even creation, could be conceptually corrupted by one brief, reputation-damaging word about a person's appearance.
It demonstrates that words carry a toxic spiritual substance. They are not merely air. They are potent agents of corruption that can defile and destabilize something massive.
Yeah.
The moral weight assigned to these seemingly superficial words is immense. The lesson is that our reputation and dignity are sacred.
And even minor attacks against them have cosmic repercussions. And then we have the beautiful counterexample, which redirects our focus away from the superficial, the story of Mas'ud's legs.
Yes, when some companions laughed at Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's thin legs, again, a physical attribute, the Prophet intervened immediately to shift the conceptual metric of worth.
What did he say?
He told them, "Look beyond the appearance, for those legs would be heavier than the mountain of Uhud on the day of judgment."
This completely undermines the mocker's foundation, doesn't it? The mocker relies on superficial, visible traits to judge value, but the Prophet redirected them to the hidden reality.
A person's true worth is based entirely on their unseen, genuine deeds and piety. It's an ethical mandate to judge people by the weight of their character, not the thinness of their limbs or the perceived flaws of their appearance.
These narratives lead us to the most complex and, I think, the most important ethical distinction in the sources: the conceptual ruling on mockery. We need to clearly delineate where mockery transitions from being a grave sin to the ultimate spiritual transgression: disbelief or kufr.
This hinges entirely on the object of the scorned. There's a very precise conceptual threshold.
Okay, let's start with the clearest case: mocking Allah, his verses, or his messenger.
The ruling here is absolute. This
Right.
is kufr, disbelief. The sources reference Surah At-Tawbah, where those who mocked were confronted, and their flimsy excuse, "Oh, we were only conversing and playing," was completely rejected.
The text says,
Say, "Was it at Allah, his verses, and his messenger that you are mocking? Do not apologize. You have disbelieved after your belief." The defense of "it was just banter" is spiritually nullified in the face of blasphemy.
and the scholarly consensus.
Drawing on figures like Ibn Taymiyyah and Al-Razi, it confirms that mocking the religion reflects utter disdain, istihza. And disdain is conceptually incompatible with reverence, which is the cornerstone of faith. If you hold the divine law in contempt, you have conceptually dismantled the very basis of your belief.
Okay. Now we move to the incredibly important nuance: mocking believers. This is where we need to be very precise about the conceptual target. Let's first cover the ruling if you mock a believer's appearance or character: their clumsiness, their voice, their personal preferences.
If the mockery is directed solely at a believer's non-religious personal attributes, it's considered prohibited by unanimous consensus, ijma, and is deemed a major, grave sin. It's highly damaging to the community, and it incurs divine anger.
So mocking a friend for their poor taste in clothing is a major sin, but it doesn't reach the level of apostasy.
Correct. It attacks the personal, not the sacred. But here's the critical pivot. This is the moment the conceptual classification jumps to apostasy. Mockery of their adherence to Islam.
Define that conceptual leap for us.
This happens when the mocker deliberately targets a believer because of their commitment to a religious practice or instruction from the divine law, the Sharia. For example, if someone mocks a man because he has a beard that adheres to the prophetic tradition.
Or mocks a woman specifically for wearing the hijab.
Exactly. Or mocks someone for their regularity in fasting or prayer. The ruling in that case escalates dramatically.
Too wide.
According to major scholarly opinion, including Ibn Taymiyyah and the Permanent Committee, this transitions into apostasy, ridda, or kufr.
Why does the ruling escalate so drastically? This is where the conceptual framework really needs to be explored.
Because the object of the mockery has conceptually changed. You are no longer mocking the person's ego or their personal failings. You are mocking the source of the instruction.
Ah.
The believer is merely the agent upholding the divine law. When you attack them for that adherence, you are expressing disdain for the Sharia itself. And mocking the divine law is conceptually equivalent to denying its validity or authority, which is the very definition of disbelief.
So the difference between a grave sin and disbelief is not the harshness of the word, but whether the insult's true target is the human vessel or the divine instruction that the vessel holds.
Absolutely. The intent dictates the conceptual outcome. If the mocker's scorn is aimed at ridiculing the divine instruction, the mocker has placed themselves in direct opposition to the foundation of faith. This ruling serves as a powerful conceptual protector of the integrity of the faith practices themselves.
It provides the ultimate ethical guardrail against the subtle erosion of religious practice through social pressure and mockery. Having covered the severity, let's wrap up by examining the internal state and the external consequences, the harms and pathology of mockery.
It's essential to recognize that mockery is fundamentally pathological. The act says far more about the aggressor than it does about the victim. The sources pinpoint several negative internal states responsible for this behavior.
And what's the primary cause listed?
Arrogance, kibr. Kibr is conceptually defined in two ways: the rejection of truth and the belittling of others. Mockery is simply the externalization of that internal disease, that feeling of being so superior that you feel entitled to diminish the status of others for sport or for advantage.
And what about the other, more tactical motivations?
Well, we find the deliberate desire to diminish status, which is often driven by jealousy and fear of rivalry. That's the motivation behind Tiger. But equally dangerous is mockery driven purely by self-serving entertainment, where the goal is simply to amuse others or oneself, completely disregarding the very real pain and psychological damage being inflicted on the victim. It's pure selfishness used as a weapon.
Let's summarize the far-reaching impact of this pathology, the extensive list of harms that flow from contempt.
The harms are comprehensive. They attack the community at its very core. On a social harm level, mockery directly breaks the bonds of brotherhood, or ukhuwah. It sows seeds of hatred and profound resentment, fosters the desire for revenge, and it destroys social unity and compassion. It just creates a hostile social environment.
It forces individuals to erect defensive walls against their own community members.
And spiritually, the harm is acute. Mockery directly incurs Allah's anger and results in the erosion and ultimate loss of good deeds in the hereafter. It causes the heart to harden, which leads to spiritual negligence. And the historical examples of the mockers of Prophet Noah serve as a permanent caution. Scorn leads to destruction.
And what about the personal harm to the aggressor, the self-inflicted wound?
The mocker ultimately experiences a boomerang effect, a loss of personal dignity and inevitable disgrace. The sources emphasize a powerful prophetic warning about this divine consequence, the Tayyir Hadith.
This is where it gets really interesting. This hadith details the ultimate consequence for violating human dignity.
The warning is severe, and it speaks to the sanctity of privacy. Whoever seeks to expose the faults of their Muslim brother, Allah will expose their faults. And if Allah exposes someone's faults, He will disgrace them, even if they are in the privacy of their own homes.
Divine exposure of their hidden flaws. So the mocker, who sought status by revealing the faults of others, will have their own dignity stripped away by the divine no matter where they hide. This really underscores the core belief that the sanctity of a person's dignity is immense.
Some sources even claim it is greater than the Kaaba itself.
That's the conceptual metric for worth. The sacredness of a building, however holy, is secondary to the inherent God-given dignity of the human soul. Mockery is thus a violation of the most sacred trust.
It is.
So if the pathology begins with arrogance, with kibr, the remedy must be radical humility. What do the great scholars advise as a conceptual defense mechanism against the impulse to judge and mock?
They advise an intense, almost fearful form of self-reflection. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud encapsulated this fear of spiritual transference beautifully. He said, "If I mocked a dog, I would fear that I might become a dog."
That's a staggering level of humility. He feared that the very act of contempt would spiritually degrade him, causing him to acquire the trait that he scorned.
It acts as an internal conceptual check against the impulse of contempt. Ibrahim an-Nakhai similarly advised that what prevents him from speaking ill of someone else's shortcomings is the fear that he might be tested with that same shortcoming later in life. It's a mechanism that weaponizes humility and self-awareness against judgmental thoughts.
This moves the discussion from just policing external behavior to cultivating internal ethical purity. And the final advice provides a holistic ethical mandate for all social interactions.
That mandate is the three guiding principles given by Yahya ibn Mu'adh, designed to replace the pathology of mockery with proactive care and brotherhood. A believer should be guided by this. Do not harm, do not distress, and do not criticize if you cannot sincerely praise.
That simplifies the entire highly detailed taxonomy into three core positive behavioral goals.
It does.
What a comprehensive and ethical framework. We began by dissecting the conceptual difference between unprovoked contempt, sukriya, and the reactive dismissal of sincerity, istival. We mapped the subtle acts of aggression from the hidden dagger of whispering hams to the deceptive irony of sarcasm, takum.
And we learned that the conceptual weight of the action is judged entirely on the mocker's intent and the object of their scorn. The difference between a joke and a sin, or a sin and apostasy, lies entirely in the intention to belittle, and whether that scorn targets a divine instruction or merely a personal flaw.
The entire architecture is built to protect the intrinsic worth and dignity of the individual, recognizing that the focus of true worth is the hidden goodness of the heart, not the outward appearances that are so often the target of scorn. The words we speak really do carry cosmic weight.
Indeed. We have to remember the prophetic mandate. The dignity of a human being is a sacred boundary.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner, based on this deep dive. Reflect again on the severity of the spiritual law. Aisha's single derogatory word about Safiya's height was conceptually severe enough to potentially corrupt the vast water of the sea. If one brief, spoken comment carries that much gravity and spiritual toxicity, consider the accumulated weight of casual, widespread online mockery, gossip, and instantaneous social media ridicule today. If those words are conceptually poisonous, what is the impact of that constant, widespread venom on the sea of our modern, digitally connected global community? We'll leave you with that profound ethical question to reflect on.
Until next time.
Keep digging deep.